Hello and welcome to Macro Mondays here on Landy's Crypto Corner, powered by the Goxstein News Network. Today is July 14th, 2025, and we're looking at Bitcoin hitting another one of our targets at $123,000. So you might remember on Friday, I mentioned that if Bitcoin did trade above $120,000, there was an area of interest at around $123,000. And I showed that across various time frames, how that kind of confluence was lining up. We did get that move in the Monday candle, and we have hit $123,000. So that means, now we can look for where could things possibly go if we see price trading above $123,000. And, if this was the high, what should we be looking out for? Now, if we do see Bitcoin get back above around 120,800 to 900 area, I think that $123,000 isn't too far away for price action to get to. If we do see it trade above there, and especially close above there, then I would raise that target to around $125,000, possibly a swing above, but I would be careful there. I'd be looking somewhere around 125. So, and that's primarily what I was talking about on Friday anyway. We hit the 118 to 120 area. Then it was 120 to 123 as a possibility. Anywhere above 123, 125. Above 125, 128 to $130,000. And I'll show you the confluence with that yet again here in just a moment. But what would a high look like if it did paint on the chart here for the daily? Well, you'll get a technical high on price action here for Bitcoin on any closes below 118,950, but I would be looking for more on a closing structure. In fact, I'd be looking somewhere around the 117,240 to the 117.5 area. If we started to see closes below there, then I'd be looking down to the upper first, rather, in this case, not lower, but upper first, which is right around $116,000. That's the next big area that I would look for. Swings down to 115 are fine, but you can see that the upper first is the close open of the candle that broke out and closed above $112,000. Not just swung above, which is what we saw on Wednesday of last week. We saw the Thursday candle break out and close above 112. And it closed at that 116 area. That's now where the upper first is. If Bitcoin were to maintain closes above the upper first, that preserves expansion to the upside in a more aggressive fashion. Otherwise, I'd be looking for a test back down somewhere to 112 to 110 at these highs. Of course, we saw some swings up into this area as well. So we've got some confluent areas down here to pay attention to. And I'll just highlight those really quick here. Somewhere around this area, your 110 to 112 area. That would be right around the basis band, in fact. And the nice thing is the basis band is well above the last higher low that would break trend here. So, even if it was going to put in a high, we're very likely going to see a higher low. That doesn't necessarily mean that we'd get continuation to a new higher high, but we'd very likely see a higher low as it relates to this last higher low consolidation structure down here at 107,270. So even if we do get a high put in, if this is a local high, be aware that we're very highly likely to see a higher low structure on a close and a swing. And if it's coming in above the upper first, that preserves the expansive structure of the bands here and price action. So if we do see that dropped, then I'd be looking for some mean reversion back somewhere around the basis, somewhere around the 112 to 110 region. And I would want to see the bulls hold that if it did get there. That would be, of course, a retest of the breakout. And not too much more to say outside of that for the daily here. It looks really good. Nice big move up. Ugly candle at the top here, but that doesn't mean too much as the move is still ongoing until we see a local high put in. Again, that'll be, closes below 118. What is it? 118,950. So essentially 119. If we start to see low 119 dropped, be aware if it starts to get towards the end of the daily that that high might be technically in, but I need to see an additional close below the 117 2 to, you can call it 200 to 500 here by the close open here. And that's where, I'd be looking for that upper first to possibly get tapped at 116, maybe even a swing at 115. If we started to see closes below there, then we could potentially be looking at a correction back to the high side structure here, 110 to 112. Otherwise, like I said, trading back above, in this case, the upper second. But I'd still keep it as a zone above, 120, then 123 is definitely back in the cards, but not until we started to see price trading and closing above, 123, would I really be looking for a 125. If we did get a slight close above it, it would make it available at 125. And then, of course, above 125, I'm looking 128 to 130, which I'll show you again in just a moment on the fib structure for the local prior high at 109.360 to the low at at 74 420.69, lines up with a 1414 at 128, and then you have a macro fib structure that lines up at 128 to 130, depending on the chart that you're using. Now, there's a few things here that are telling me that, there are corrections that could be on the board here, but they'd be local corrections. And that is if we do see a high put in, there is some higher high RSI structure from, the 112 and even it's back here. We're actually going all the way back to, it's close. Yeah, no, so it'd actually be the 112 high. Where we could get a bearish divergence that populates on some indicators that have a longer look back period. But in this case, that's corrective, right? And kind of doesn't mean much. And what I'd be looking for is bearish divergence to start populating within this current uptrend. That is the most powerful type of bearish divergence that you'll see. And so far, we don't have any. And, even when we start getting some drives of it, that doesn't bar price from hitting higher highs. It's just warning that there might be a potential for a trend reversal coming up or a larger correction at the very minimum. We also see that any closes below, in this case, 121, we'll call it 800, we will see momentum turn down within the context being in the overbought zone. Now, this, again, can stay in the overbought zone or even the bullish control zone for a momentum indicator like a regular Stochh like this for an extended period of time, usually longer than most can remain patient, as we saw back here from April to May. And that's when Bitcoin was ripping back to the highs here. And, that's something that can usually frustrate the bears. But in this case, I'm all for frustrating the bears. This was a great move, great positioning. We've had Bitcoin literally just nailing each target that we've been talking about the entire time for quite some time now. It's not always going to be that way. It's going to outrun my targets to the upside or downside at some point here, as I'm being pretty methodical and conservative about some of the local targets, but I do upload 3 videos a week, so it does afford me the luxury of looking at things on a little bit more of a local target level. But let's go ahead and head up to the weekly here and just note kind of where things are on the weekly. And I want to keep the daily structure kind of on the screen here that I pointed out here with the 110 to 112 area, the last daily higher low structure at 107.270, and of course the high, which is right by the upper second standard deviation. Now, one of the key things that you'll note here is we still have not hit volatility expansion on the BBWP yet, but we are very volatile within the bands. We haven't yet closed above the upper second. We did get a slight close open below the lower second, so we actually had the big leg up, right? The 108.4 area here, and then we had the 109.360, and then we corrected as the bands were beginning to compress, and then we kicked off expansion to the downside, but bounced off of the bands all the way back to the upside. So we ended up with the bands in an expansive posture. And in this case, I wouldn't be looking for an aggressive expansion to the upside until we saw closes above $123,000 now. Now, of course, on the daily, the upper third is by 125. And you can see the upper third on the weekly is all the way up here at $136,000. And that's where, things could get interesting, but there is a few things to note here on the weekly. As long as Bitcoin is trading above the upper first, which is right at 110, especially on weekly closes, this move looks good to keep marching or at least grinding its way to the upside here, back towards the upper second as it continues expansion, especially on closes above the upper first. I also want to note where the weekly high or low is and some significant things that are now occurring with some structure on the weekly as it relates to our Bollinger Band set here. And that is that the last weekly high or low on a close there at 101, with the low coming in at the 98.2 level or so, is now right where the basis band is. Now, this is a 20 simple moving average, and we want to see this above this zone here. It's right at the bottom side, which is good, but we want to see it above this zone, which is going to basically, we want to see Bitcoin closing above that upper first, above 110, getting that continuation to the upside to hit some of those deeper targets and pulling that basis band up above the 101 region here, above the close open high or low. This is now the last weekly high or low, or the most recent weekly high or low at 101 on a close, and of course 98.225 on the swing. And this is good. This is a good look for the bulls. Ugly Monday candle, but doesn't mean much just yet. It's really far away from its last higher low structure, and it could very easily correct into a higher low structure from here, and then we can see where it goes from there, or just get straight up continuation. Now, one of the key things that I want to note here about some of these levels of where we're currently at versus where price could potentially go. So first, I'm going to get rid of some of this other stuff. We don't need these anymore. That's old. So let's go ahead and go to the monthly real quick and just take a local fib pull. Now, this is log scale, so understand we can work log or linear. I like to work log, especially when looking at a monthly. And then we could always compare to linear. But when looking at the local Fibonacci structure, we just hit that 1272, and we can see that we're also right up against the upper second standard deviation for the monthly, which is at $120,000. We'd like to see closes above there for bullish. If you're bearish, you want to see this reject, but we want to see closes above there for bullish. And I'm bullish. I'd like to see closes above there, and then price working its way up to $128,000 to $130,000. Now, you might remember that when I just pulled this on the weekly, or when I was looking at the weekly rather, the upper third is starting to get up towards a 1.618 or 61.8% above 109,360. 414 is basically 109,360 plus 41.4% is $128,000 to $130,000, right? Well, from a weekly standpoint for local structure, if we start seeing closes on the weekly above 128 to 130, I'd be looking mid 130s all the way up to potentially 138 to 140 by this 1.618, especially on swings as we see the upper third expanding and accelerating towards that area. And that's really only going to occur if we see closes consistently above that upper first standard deviation. So we need to see that 110 area hold. Anywhere above there, then we can start entertaining a trip to 150. It's definitely on the board at a 1786 or 78.6% above the 109,360 high there. Now, why is this 1414 so important? Because this has confluence with a macro fib pull on log scale at 128,000. So I've shown this many, many times, but I do get a lot of new people, so please bear with me. And this is where we can just go back and take a pull of the prior $69,000 high to the $15,500 low. And you can see that that we have right there at $128,000, we've got the 1414 from a macro structure as well. So local structure and macro structure are agreeing that this is a major area. That means that if we start passing that level, we can start looking to the mid 130s, and then 138 to 140 and 150 and so on. And then potentially, if we get closes on the monthly above here, we could potentially be looking for another big 1618 level. And that's at around, I would say, 170 to 175. I would give it some room because it's going to get very volatile, especially if we see Bitcoin closing above the upper second standard deviation. You can see that Bitcoin is actually in just a straight up grind to the upside here. And we would kick off some pretty big expansion. And we've gone from expansion coming out of the bear market to make the first high prior to the halving at 73,835. We saw the expansion phase begin. You can really tell that by the bottom bands dropping off the screen here. We got that mean reversion. We've been back in a compression ever since. So we haven't really seen, although price has been very volatile within the bands, we have not seen a true volatility expansion again since March of 2024. It's been over a year. And we could potentially see that again, which would target 1618s and potentially more, maybe even more. Maybe it starts hitting to the 200 levels that so many are looking for. But one step at a time, Major level of interest overhead on a macro time frame is 128 to 130. So the way to get there is get that daily above 123, push that upper third at 125, and then go for that 1414. And if we start to see longer term timeframes close above there, all good to start raising targets. And just be aware of this daily candle. It is an ugly one. The move is not over though. So while it might be an inverted hammer and an ugly candle, that does not mean that price cannot rise past it. We definitely need to see closes above this swing high though at 123, 231.07 now. That's where we would get the daily closes starting to look up towards that 125 if it wasn't already hit. But more importantly, daily closes above here would not only target that area, but potentially more to that 128 to 130. So looks good. And yeah, even if it corrects, I mean, that last higher low, it's so far away. So it's very, very, very highly likely going to put in a higher low. We really just ultimately need to see Bitcoin closing, in my opinion, above the 110 region. That's going to be key for me to look for. It's the weekly upper first. And it would be a nice correction, of course, after hitting $123,000, drop off $13,000 to hit that area would be, really borne upon closes below the upper first here, and definitely losing that, not only that 116 where the close open breakout candle came in, but definitely getting below that 115. Then we have to entertain 110 to 112 again. But we would definitely want to see the bulls holding that up, and for continuation, of course, to the upside, maybe a compression and then a re-expansion. Or, like I keep saying, this move is not yet over. 85 over 75 is close, but this move is not over yet. And even if it goes sideways or corrects into higher low structure, what we're going to end up with is the bands will move past price and even past the highs. We'll likely see the upper second standard deviation swoop up over price, especially if price doesn't close above it. It'll swoop up over it, giving us those deeper targets by the upper second. And, that's where we could potentially see the upper second up by the upper third. As it stands right now, we just have to monitor this, and we'll check in on Wednesday for the Wednesday check-in. And I hope you all have a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening, no matter where you are in the world. Please trade safe, of course. As always, stay safe. With all of that being said, Landy out, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Take care.